Congressman Adam Schiff of California, member of the House Appropriations and Intelligence Committees, a supporter, we should note, of the bipartisan immigration reform legislation that was approved by the upper chamber last year. First of all, Congressman, let me just get your reaction to the Republican plan, as you just heard it there, starting to be outlined here, their plan for immigration reform, which, unlike the bipartisan Senate bill, does not include a path to citizenship. Could you support that?
No, that's not what I want to see. But on the positive side, Craig, I'm glad that the Republicans are taking this up again. Many wanted just to deep six this issue as long as they possibly could. So I think this forward movement is positive. But we don't want to have two classes of Americans, the almost Americans and then the fully American citizens. I don't think that makes much sense. But it's at least a starting point to have conversations about specific legislation. The frustrating thing is, if the Speaker made the decision tomorrow to bring up that Senate bill on the House floor, it would pass, and we could resolve this issue as simple as that.
It sounds like you're a little skeptical that that's actually going to happen. Why is that?
The one thing that I would add to the report that you just got is I think what's going to happen between the closed doors of that Republican conference this week is you're going to have some of the Republicans making the argument, hey, look, we're becoming a very small tent party. We're going to have to deal with immigration reform if we ever want to have the White House again. But you're going to have a very powerful faction of Republicans saying, let's not bring up this issue that divides our base. Let's just keep our sole focus on the Affordable Care Act. That's the issue for us. So a lot of the members are not going to want this on the plate. And I'm afraid that political argument may overcome the policy argument among the Republican conference.
Congressman, what about this argument as well that you've heard, I'm sure you've heard from at least a few members on the other side of the aisle, that part of the opposition is simply rooted in the fact a lot of immigrants, when they come to this country, vote Democratic, and passing comprehensive immigration reform could very well be a nail in the coffin of the modern GOP. What say you to that argument?
Well, that's a very cynical argument to say we don't want these folks as citizens because they won't vote for us. I hope that they will put the policy interests of the country ahead. And I certainly think it's the case, as we saw in the last presidential election, that if the Republicans continue to stand in the way of immigration reform, if they continue to say to millions and millions of people that we're going to force you to stay in the shadows, they are going to be like the dinosaurs. They're going to go the way of the dinosaurs politically. So I just don't think that's an option for them in the mid or long term. The question is, do they decide in the short term they're better off not having this issue on the plate? I hope they don't reach that conclusion.
President Obama on the road today in Waukesha, Wisconsin, as I'm sure you know. Yesterday he was in Pennsylvania at both of those stops, echoing familiar sentiments. Basically what we heard from the State of the Union, a boiled-down version of that speech. Among other things, calling for a hike in the minimum wage in this country. We know that the average American supports it. Apparently a majority of the House and Senate, bipartisan support there. Why has this not happened yet? What's the holdup? When is it going to happen?
Yeah, it should happen. It's very popular around the country. And again, it's one of those issues where if you put it to a vote, it's going to pass. Some of the strong business interests are lobbying against it, and they have a disproportionate say when it comes to the House leadership. So we may not get the chance to vote for it. But the reality is it's not only equitable in terms of trying to raise the wage of some of those who are struggling the most in this country, but it's good economics. Those folks have to, put this income back into the economy to pay their rent, to buy groceries, to buy consumer goods. So the companies that are selling all those goods, it's good for them, too.
Republicans argue, though, that it's going to cause, especially small businesses, it would force them to lay off workers, that it's going to ultimately hurt a lot of the folks that you're trying to help.
Craig, this is always the argument that's made against the minimum wage, and while in theory you can understand that argument, in practice there's never been empirical evidence that proves to be true. It just doesn't affect behavior that way. We don't see job losses when we raise the minimum wage, and we have a lot of historical data to deal with. It's not like this is the first time the minimum wage has been proposed to be increased, but the reality is we're also back at a level we haven't seen since 1968 in terms of the value of the minimum wage. So, theoretically, you can make that argument, as some do. In practice, empirically, we just don't see job losses ever accompany an increase in the minimum wage.
Really quickly, Congressman, I have to ask you about your Democratic colleague from California there, Congressman Henry Waxman, who has been a part of that lower chamber for, you correct me if I'm wrong, I mean, this is going into his 4th decade. I mean, this is his 20th term. Such an influential voice for Democrats especially. What are you going to miss most about Congressman Waxman?
Oh, boy, there's a long list of things I'll miss. He has, had his hand in almost every major domestic issue in the last 3 or 4 decades. When you go to the store and you pick up food and you look at the nutrition label, you can thank Henry Waxman. Similarly, when you look at prescription drugs and you want to go for the generic because it's cheaper, you can thank Henry. In terms of environmental legislation, health care legislation, the Affordable Care Act, there's probably no other Democrat that has had a bigger influence in the last 40 years. It's going to leave a big hole in this institution, and it's a big loss for California and for the country.
There are some who are speculating that he's getting out because he knows Democrats have no chance of winning the House, and he does not want to be around for another minority.
No, I don't think that's the case.
Okay.
I think Henry is optimistic in terms of Democratic fortunes, but I think he would like to go on to do some other things, and he's decided after 4 decades that the time has come.
All right. Always a pleasure. Congressman Adam Schiff there.
Thanks, Craig.
From California. Do appreciate